There is a moment you recognize, even if you have never said it out loud. You send a message. It sits there unanswered. Hours pass, then a day. And suddenly, when it is already too late to matter, you get a reply that pretends nothing happened. As if time has no weight, as if your attention is infinite and disposable. Or you are given a task at the last minute, always at the last minute, not once, not twice, repeatedly. As if your schedule is not real, as if your time has no borders, or a promise is made, quietly, casually. We will revisit this. We will discuss your role. We will fix this. And then nothing happens. Not because it was forgotten, because it was never meant to be kept. And you feel something you cannot quite name. It is not just irritation. It is not just stress. It is a subtle pressure, a quiet erosion, a feeling that something is being taken from you, but you cannot point to a single moment where you agreed to give it. You start asking yourself questions that never lead anywhere. Maybe they are busy. Maybe you are overreacting. Maybe this is normal. Maybe you just need to be more patient. But the feeling does not leave. It accumulates. And here is the shift that changes everything. This is not about poor communication. This is not about disorganization. This is not about occasional mistakes. This is a system. Not a loud one. Not an obvious one. But precise. Consistent. Predictable. You are not being ignored by accident. You are being measured. Every delay, every broken promise, every last-minute request is not random noise. It is a probe, a test, a way to map your limits without ever asking you directly. Because power rarely announces itself. It calibrates. And once you see this, the pattern stops looking chaotic. It becomes structured. The first thing to understand is simple and uncomfortable. Silence is interpreted as permission. You receive a message late. You still respond, calmly, professionally, without friction. What you think you are doing is being reasonable. What the system records is something else entirely. It records that delay does not cost anything. Next time, the delay grows. Not dramatically, just slightly. Enough to see if the boundary moves. And if it does, it becomes the new normal. The problem is not the late reply. The problem is the data it generates. Your reaction becomes a signal, and that signal defines your range. Then comes the second layer. Urgency is manufactured to test priority inversion. A task appears suddenly. It is framed as critical. It interrupts everything. You adjust. You rearrange. You deliver. On the surface, this looks like flexibility, like commitment, like being a strong employee. But the real mechanism is different. The system is checking whether your priorities are stable or negotiable. If everything can be dropped instantly, then nothing you planned has real weight. Not your schedule, not your boundaries, not your time. And once that is established, urgency stops being an exception. It becomes a tool. Not because everything is urgent, because you have shown that urgency works on you. Third layer. Broken promises are not failures. They are filters. You are told something will happen. It does not. You wait. You do not confront. Or you confront softly, carefully, almost apologetically. What you think is happening is a delay. What is actually happening is selection. The system is identifying whether you track commitments or absorb them. If you absorb them, they disappear. And with them disappears your ability to rely on future agreements. This is how unpredictability is introduced. Not to confuse you, but to weaken your internal structure. Because a person who cannot rely on words becomes dependent on moods. Fourth layer. Ambiguity is used to shift responsibility without visible conflict. Instructions are vague. Expectations are fluid. Success is undefined. You do the work. Then you are told it is not quite right, not exactly what was needed. Something is missing, but it was never specified. You begin to compensate. You overthink. You double-check everything. You try to anticipate invisible expectations. What you believe is happening is miscommunication. What is actually happening is control through uncertainty. Because when the rules are unclear, you cannot anchor yourself. And when you cannot anchor yourself, you seek external validation. That is where control stabilizes. Fifth layer. Emotional neutrality on your side becomes a resource on theirs. You stay calm. You do not react. You absorb pressure quietly. You do not escalate. This feels like maturity. But in this system, it has a side effect. It removes friction. And without friction, there is no feedback. Without feedback, the system does not self-correct. It expands. Not because someone is consciously trying to harm you, because the structure rewards what works. And what works is whatever you tolerate. Sixth layer. Your identity begins to shift without you noticing. You stop expecting timely responses. You start planning around delays. You lower the importance of your own tasks before anyone asks you to. You become preemptively compliant, not because you agreed to it, because you adapted to survive the pattern. And this is where the system becomes internal. It no longer needs to test you actively. You start enforcing the limits on yourself. Seventh layer. The most dangerous part is not the behavior itself. It is the interpretation you build around it. You start explaining it in ways that protect the system. They are under pressure. This is just how things are. I need to be more resilient. Each explanation removes clarity and replaces it with acceptance. Not conscious acceptance, structural acceptance. This is how control becomes invisible. Now step back and look at the whole architecture. Delayed responses measure your tolerance for neglect. Last-minute tasks measure your flexibility under pressure. Broken promises measure your attachment to agreements. Ambiguity measures your dependence on external validation. Your calmness measures how far the system can expand without resistance. These are not separate incidents. They are coordinates. Together, they create a map of you. Not who you think you are, but what you allow. And once that map is clear, the system does not need to push randomly anymore. It moves with precision. Not too much. Not too little. Just enough. Enough to extract more time, more attention, more compliance, without triggering a break. So what changes this? Not anger, not sudden rebellion, not dramatic confrontation. Clarity. You stop interpreting behavior as isolated events. You start seeing patterns. You stop asking, why did this happen? You start asking, what does my reaction teach the system? You stop rewarding what drains you. A delayed message does not require immediate availability. A false urgency does not automatically override your structure. A broken promise does not get silently absorbed. You do not need to fight the system. You need to stop feeding it clean data. Because the system adapts to signals. Change the signal, and the behavior around you begins to shift. Not always dramatically, not always instantly, but inevitably. And here is the most important shift. You stop confusing professionalism with self-erasure. You can be calm without being passive. You can be cooperative without being absorbent. You can be reliable without being endlessly available. The system may not become fair. Your manager may not change. The structure may remain exactly as it is. But something fundamental stops. You are no longer an open surface that can be tested indefinitely. You become defined, not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly. And clarity does something pressure cannot work around. It creates limits, not by force, by presence. And once those limits exist, the testing does not disappear, but it changes direction. Because the system is not looking for conflict. It is looking for space. And when there is no space left to quietly expand into, it stops pushing there. That is where control returns, not because the world became different, because you did.